So we're going to begin 4.3 by introducing the idea of a quadratic function. So a quadratic function is going to be something that looks like this: ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's your sort of general format for a quadratic function. When you're actually looking at an example of a quadratic function, you're going to have a number in place of the a, and it can be any number except for 0. You're going to have a number in place of the b, and then you're going to have a number in place of the c. And so that would be an example of a quadratic function. The easiest way to recognize a quadratic function is to look for the squared. So if your highest power is a 2 in the problem, then you know that you are dealing with a quadratic function. So quadratic functions graph what are called parabolas. So a parabola is sort of a U-shaped graph. It will either open up, like the one that we have here in the picture, or it also could open down. And we'll see an example of that in just a minute. So we need to be able to do two things with these parabolas. The first is that we need to be able to find a special point that is right here at the bottom of this parabola. That point is called the vertex. So the vertex is defined to be the point on the parabola when the graph changes direction. So if you look at this part of the parabola, this part is going down. And it continues to go down until it gets to this point at the bottom. And when it gets to this point at the bottom, then tracing the graph, it starts to go up. So the point where it actually changes direction is called that vertex point. So one thing that we're going to be doing in this section is actually finding that vertex. And so we do have a formula that we can use to find the vertex. And that formula is here. Okay, we're going to come back to that in just a minute and use that for an example. The other thing that we need to be able to do is to determine by looking at the function whether the parabola opens up or down. And that is done by looking at the a value. Now, when I say the a value, I mean the number that sits in front of the x squared in your function. So we're going to look at that a value, and if that a value is positive, then the graph is going to open up. And if the a value is negative, it's going to open down. So as we start looking at examples, we're going to look at those two things. So let me go ahead and show you an example of something that opens down, just so you can see one of those, and then we're going to try a few examples of our own. All right, so in this quadratic function, the a value, the number sitting in front of the x squared, is a -3. So the parabola, you can see in the picture, is opening down. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and look at a couple of examples. I've given you two here, two quadratic functions, and the questions are asking you to find the vertex, and I want us to also talk about whether the graph is going to open up or down. Right, so let's go ahead and do that opening up or down part first. If I look at my a value in the first one, my a value is a +3. So that should tell me that the graph is going to open up. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 3 in for my a value, and then make the notation that the graph is going to open up. Okay, again, if the 3 is positive, it's going to open up. All right, so let's go ahead and identify the other values before we get started. We have for our b value, the b, remember, is the number that sits in front of the x. And so our b value is going to be a -6, and we do take the signs with those values. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make a note that the b is -6. And then the c value is the number that sits by itself. In our case here, it's going to be a -5. All right, so let's go ahead and see about calculating our vertex for this problem. So the tricky part is this -b that's on the top. So what you want to remember is that when you're doing this calculation, that negative in front of the b basically tells you to take the opposite sign of what you already have. So if the b value is -6 and the formula says to do the negative of that, then we're going to be entering in a +6 on the top. So just remember that that negative there tells you to do the opposite of the b value that you have. All right, and then on the bottom, we're going to do 2 times our a value. So what is our a value? Our a value is 3, so 2 times 3 is going to also give me 6. And we know that 6 over 6 is going to equal 1. Okay, so when I'm thinking about my vertex, what I have just found now is that the x value is 1. Now I need to find the y value that goes with it. So in order to find the y value when you have the x, all you really need to do is plug it in. So I'm going to come up here, and wherever there's an x, okay, in both of those places right there, I'm going to be entering in this x value that we have, which is a 1. All right, so let's set this up and make sure that we can do this. So I'm going to have a 3, and then in parentheses, I'm going to be substituting in a 1, and then we have a squared on it. And I'm going to continue to write the rest of the problems. I have -6. And again, I come to another x, so I'm going to substitute in a 1. And then finally, I have a -5 on the end. All right, so let's do this calculation. We know that we do our exponents first. So 1 squared is just going to stay 1. So we're still going to have 3 times 1 right here. And then I'm just going to rewrite the rest of this for now. Okay, and then once the exponents are done, we do the multiplication. So 3 times 1 is 3, -6, -5. All right, and you certainly could go to your calculator with that and calculate that. 3 minus 6 is -3, -5 would be -8. So now you have an x value and you have a y value to go with it. And so the problem asks you to find the vertex. And so we would say that the vertex is going to be the point with an x value of 1 and a y value of -8. And so that will be our vertex. So we know that the thing opens up, and we know that the vertex is at 1, -8. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our second example. Let's do the same thing. Let's write down the a, b, and c values to get us started. So remember the a value is the number in front of the x squared. So that would be -3. Our b value is the number in front of the x. So that would be 4. And our c value is the number in front, the number that stands by itself. So that would be -7. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our calculation now for the x value for the vertex. So again, -b means the opposite of the b. So if we have a +4 for the b, I'm going to be putting a -4 on top of this fraction. All right, and then we have 2 times a, and our a value is -3. So 2 times -3 is -6. All right, so let's do a little simplifying here. Because we have a negative in both the top and the bottom, we know that those negatives will cancel out. And 4 over 6 is going to reduce to 2 over 3. They're both divisible by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just write this as a positive 2/3. Now this one is maybe a little bit more difficult because it's a fraction. But we have our calculator. We're going to let the calculator do most of the work for us here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set it up, finding my y value. Remember that you're going to now plug 2/3 in everywhere there's an x. So I'm going to start with that -3. I'm going to plug 2/3 in for that first x. And remember that this term is squared, so I'll put the squared on there. Then I have plus 4x, so I'm going to do plus 4, and I'm going to substitute in the 2/3. And then on the end I have minus 7. Now, what I would probably suggest you do here is that you go to your calculator and you type this in. Instead of trying to calculate each individual piece and then deal with the different denominators, I would say let's just go and let the calculator do the work here for us. You can try this on your own, and if you don't get the right answer, feel free to shoot me an email and maybe send me a screenshot of what you typed in your calculator, and I can try to help you figure out why you are not getting the correct answer. When I type it in my calculator, I'm going to get negative 5.67. Negative 5.67 is what I get as a decimal. Well, actually, I get negative 5.6 and a bunch of sixes, and then finally a 7 at the end. But if I round it to 2 decimal places, I get negative 5.67. Our calculator does have the ability to put it back in fraction form, and that would be better. So when I do that, remember you can do that by pressing your math key and enter twice if you're on a TI-83 or a TI-84 calculator. All right, and so that is going to be negative 17 over 3. All right, so our vertex, we're going to have an x value of 2/3, and then we're going to have a y value of negative 17 over 3. Now, the only thing that we didn't do on this problem is we didn't talk about whether it opens up or down. So what do you think on this? Does it open up or does it open down? All right, so because of this negative 3 and the leading coefficient on the x squared, because that's negative, we can then say that this thing should open down. So we have our vertex for each problem, and we know whether the graph opens up or down. And those are the concepts that you'll be practicing in the homework section.